Thank you all for attending. Those of you who are watching it live on air with us today, and also welcome those later who will be watching the recording. We're excited to have you all here today, and for this local context webinar on our hub programs. I guess I should introduce myself. My name is James Francis. I am from the Penobscot Nation in Maine. I'm the Director of Culture and History. I am the Chair of Local Contexts Council. I've been involved with this organization for well over a decade, and I'm excited to share with you today. I would like to introduce Janette Hamilton-Pearce to do our curricula.
Kia ora, James. Nā mihi atu ki a koe. Kia ora no tātou. Nā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. Nā mahara mai ki te kaupapa o te wā. He karakia mō tātou. Ko rangi ki runga, ko papa ki raro, ka puta ki te whaiao, ki te ao mārama. Tihei, mauri ora. Kia ora, I'm Dr. Janette Hamilton-Pearce. I hail from Te Whānau Apanui on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand, a place called Waikawa. And I love it that local context tags the world with labels, traditional knowledge and biocultural labels. So I'm the Chief of Staff at Local Context, and I'm really, really excited to be here on this call today. I'm going to hand it over to Jane. Kia ora, Jane.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name's Jane Anderson. I'm the foundress of Local Contexts and have been doing this work for a very long time, and I'm delighted to bring to you some of the changes that have been part of Local Contexts. We do want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm here in Lenape-Hoking, the lands of the Lenape Nations, known as New York City. But we want to start with our organizational land acknowledgement, particularly because we're an organization that transcends geographical boundaries. Local Context acknowledges that all the lands and waters we occupy are Indigenous homelands, and we recognize the ongoing significance of these lands and waters for Indigenous peoples in the past, present, and future. We because we are the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism and supporting a more equitable future, even though that seems very hard to think about within the United States at the moment. Nevertheless, we share this land acknowledgement to disrupt settler colonialism and to recognise whose land we're on, as well as our responsibilities as guests. We also understand that our work at Local Context as an organisation is to provide tools that can extend land acknowledgements into meaningful practice around Indigenous authority, governance, and decision-making.
Great. Thank you, Jane. So we're really excited to have you all here today or watching the recording. As James mentioned, this webinar is going to focus on the recent updates to the Local Context Hub, mostly the membership, subscription, and integration partner programs. We're going to walk through these updates, review how these changes might affect you, and also field any questions or feedback. I'm Corrie. I'm the Director of Programs with Local Context. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a settler here on Wappinger and Pawcatuck homelands in so-called Connecticut.
Great. Well, it's so great to see so many of you here with us. And I think many of you know this story, but I'm really happy to begin with it and think through the kind of history of Local Context and how we kind of have got to this point, just as a little bit of background. Local Context is an international not-for-profit organization really focused on supporting Indigenous data sovereignty and cultural authority. We offer digital labels called the Traditional Knowledge and Biocultural Labels for Indigenous communities to reinforce rights and the disclosure and engagement and collections care notices for researchers and institutions, really kind of particularly for organizations working with Indigenous collections and data to clearly identify whose rights and interests kind of sit with those. The labels and notices can be used on a range of materials, from cultural heritage collections to environmental DNA samples. And Local Context is really focused on practically supporting the authority and local power of Indigenous communities in sharing and managing their intellectual and cultural property and their relationships to biological and genetic resources. This kind of chart that you kind of see now is really an overview of Local Context from intervention to innovation and organization. This is partly because my background in intellectual property law, was really kind of listening to the challenges that this body of law poses for Indigenous communities who really wanted a different kind of practical way to intervene and to bring Indigenous authority back into records that had, where Indigenous erasure had been kind of part of the normalization of cultural memory. The traditional knowledge labels and biocultural labels were really developed as a tool for exactly that purpose in 2010 in partnership with Indigenous communities around the world. And over the last decade, we've had the opportunity to develop notices, which are a very specific tool for institutions and researchers that really allow institutions to disclose their collections and allow for researchers to be transparent in relationship to their partnerships and their ethics in relationship to research and the different kinds of materials that are produced through research. We started off as a kind of research project based out of universities in what's currently called the United States and Aotearoa, New Zealand. But in 2022, we became an independent not-for-profit organisation registered in the Navajo Nation. We really took seriously whose laws govern our organisation and kind of made a very deliberate decision to manifest Indigenous sovereignty within the very organisation that we run. So for 15 years, Local Context has been supporting Indigenous communities in intellectual property and Indigenous data sovereignty strategies. And to kind of think about what that means for 15 years to be quite persistent in relationship to not only doing this work, but developing tools and providing some of the only tools that support Indigenous data sovereignty. We're really excited to be the organisation that is at the forefront internationally doing this work. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to James to introduce some of the work locally that really makes our organisation function, which is what it means for communities to be able to both develop labels, but also then engage with institutions that are really committed to supporting Indigenous data sovereignty. And I'm going to pass it over to you, James.
Thank you, Jane. So just really quickly, before we got involved with Local Context, we as a community really were leading the way with changing our tribal governance to put some mechanism in place where we can protect our rights as Penobscot people. And one of the things we were doing was around our language, but also around materials that were written about us and not by us, engaged in our own history. And so when we started to engage with institutions that had our cultural heritage items, the natural step, and we had already been working with Jane, was to look at integrating and becoming a community that's involved with local contexts. And we have a board, it's called the Penobscot Tribal Rights and Resource Protection Board, that works in these areas of cultural and intellectual property rights for the tribe. I sit as chair of that committee, and one of the things that we did was sit down and engage with these labels and craft them to our needs. We knew exactly what we wanted out of institutions that were holding our cultural heritage items and how we wanted to protect our cultural heritage items that were in those institutions. And so we engaged with these, and sometimes there wasn't a great fit. There was a number of issues that we were seeing that couldn't easily be defined by the slate of labels at that time. And Jane was great. She was like, well, let's make one. And so the process started at looking at, okay, you want to protect your language. You know, that's, and so by doing that, none of the labels really worked with what we wanted to say about protecting our language. And so we came up with this new label for culturally sensitive materials. And it allowed us to invest in this process as a community. It was shaped by Penobscot's needs, just by having us engage with these labels and having the flexibility for us to be able to shape them to our needs. Because I think if you visit 10 different tribal groups, you're going to have many needs of the same, but you're going to have others that are going to come up that it isn't a blanket process. And we also created another one because we're really looking at sharing our collections that are in institutions all over the world with our tribal membership. We want them to share stories about those things. And so, there's a community voice label now. We wanted to put that on our system so we can encourage tribal members to tell us those stories that, this is a basket my grandmother used to make, the same style. You see these curls. And so we can capture now, some of those stories from our history. So for me, working with local contexts and becoming the chair of the council, this is all about really attending to Indigenous communities' needs. And our work with these labels really showed how flexible, how, we're labeling things from, I think, 4 museums right now. We're labeling things so that our items have Penobscot voice on them.
Thanks so much, James, for sharing that experience from a Penobscot standpoint. It's been so important to make sure that what local context does is responding to communities' needs. That's why we developed the labels first and spent many years developing those labels across multiple contexts, across multiple countries to make sure that they really did fit the needs. So when James talks about the culturally sensitive label that we really developed for language materials, we were then able to go to different communities to really refine and test and make sure that it met multiple communities' needs before we developed it as a label. But its genesis came from these real questions that the Penobscot Nation sensitivities that vest within language materials that the community might not be able to assert copyright over, but still are vital life sources for community and for community memory and for community language revitalization. So when we began in 2010, we were already listening to communities who were really frustrated with the limited options and practical tools that were available to bring Indigenous names forth, to deal with histories of erasure within archives and libraries and museums, and to think about how could you actually disrupt and change a system without utilizing formal legal mechanisms, which may never come. So the traditional knowledge labels and the biocultural labels were really developed to fit this need through very iterative discussions and partnerships. So the labels and notices are really practical mechanisms for implementing the care principles for Indigenous data governance. And I think as the care principles move into the next phase of work, which is around kind of the data maturity model, many of the examples that are coming to kind of look at the data maturity model for the care principles draw upon examples that utilize the labels and the notices. The work is also about connecting Indigenous authority, provenance, and protocols to Indigenous data, particularly within spaces that are not just heritage collections, but also move across into science spaces as well. And local context is meaningfully supported by all Indigenous data sovereignty organizations across the world, including the US Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network, the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, Timana Arunga in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Mayamnari Wingara in Australia. I'll hand it to you, Corrie.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So we wanted to share a little bit about the widespread interest and application of the labels and notices. So this is a map showing our global connections of communities, institutions, and researchers who are interested in or already using the local context system. We really do have a wide variety of connections who are using the labels and notices in a range of fields, organizations, and contexts that Emily will share about next. And this is not a map just of the labels and notices that are in use because this work really does take time and resources. So we like to highlight where these conversations are taking place to show that interest. So we are an international organization based across Turtle Island or North America and Oceania. Our connections are especially strong in those regions. And we also have largely been working in English, but are keen to support diverse geographical areas and languages as our team is able to grow. So I'll pass it over to you, Emily, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Chukma. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Santhanam, and I'm Outreach Manager at Local Context. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I currently live and work on the lands of the Red Willow people in the southwestern part of the United States in Taos, New Mexico. So labels and notices have been used by a global range of communities, institutions, researchers, and organizations, really of all sizes and types, including tribal archives, botanical gardens, university museums, as well as research stations and groups. So pictured here are Tarorora's labels applied by their iwi Conservation Department in use on a biological specimen housed at Manaki Whenua Land Care Research, which is a Crown Research Institute in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The labels and notices were also designed to be flexible and have been used in or on a wide variety of materials. So they've been applied to a website or collections database, or more specifically on a single item of cultural heritage or data set. Pictured here are the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohegans labels used physically in a medicine garden plant marker, which is at your left. And at right are Whakatōhea labels on waiata or songs or chants within their app.
Thanks, Emily. Next, we're going to hear from Maui Hudson, who is from Whakatōhea iwi, as well as from Local Context, to talk a little bit about that work.
Koutou katoa, me tēnā kia koutou tēnei rā. My name is Maui Hudson. I'm a member of the Whakatōhea Nation, and I'm also involved directly with Local Context, both as a member of the Local Context Council and as the interim co-director of Local co-executive director alongside Jane Anderson. Just want to take a chance to welcome you as well, and my welcome to the Hub Programs Q&A webinar. I think Local Context is a sort of fantastic organisation doing great work, helping connect communities with their cultural heritage items and scientific and biocultural data that's circulating in the world in all sorts of ways. Hosted and stewarded in a range of institutions and organisations, and providing ways to connect those communities with that material. Highlight its provenance and outline the different sorts of protocols and permissions, expectations those communities have in relation to that material is really important work. I was directly involved in the development of biocultural labels. My previous work had been in the area of ethics and genetics, and really thinking about how to maintain Indigenous communities' interests in relation to genetic data and scientific data generated from Indigenous flora and fauna or generated from their territories. And so work directly with Local Context, members of a variety of different communities in New Zealand, scientists and researchers and people involved in holding institutions to develop the biocultural labels as a complementary set of labels alongside the traditional knowledge labels. While those sorts of information are often sitting together in different institutions or associated with each other when they're generated through research projects, the data often sits independent of each other, and the sort of the protocols that people have in relation to traditional knowledge don't necessarily apply directly to Indigenous data or scientific data. And so that's where these kind of different tools have been generated. We then worked with Manaki Whenua or Land Care Research, which holds a number of nationally significant collections. They've put Local Context notices on over 700,000 different items. And since that point, there's been 3 communities that have added labels to the samples that came from their territories. My community, Whakatōhea, is one of those. And so there's now over 2,000 records that have labels that Whakatōhea have decided are important in the context of that sort of information. And as new new samples are added and either digitized or new samples added to the collection, our labels are attached to that material as well. We've also been able to add labels to a variety of other items, material that's come back from Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. We've added to a historical account that's been created for our treaty settlement process, a Moana plan, a marine and coastal planning document we created as part of a scientific collaboration and research project, and added to a app that we've created to share our traditional songs with our members that live across the world. I think you've probably seen a picture of that recently as well. And sitting behind me is actually a greenstone mere pounamu that came from our region, was held by belonged to one of our ancestors, and you can see the provenance, or at least the names of the different ancestors that were associated with this mere until it left our hands and found its way into a private collection, and then to Te Papa, our national museum, and that's where it sits at the moment. So, our ability to add labels to cultural resources and taonga that we have, not only in institutions around New Zealand, but increasingly around the world, is really important. Hope you take the chance to ask as many kind of questions as you need through this webinar, and look forward to engaging with you all in the future. Kia ora.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Rojas. I'm a software and web developer with Local Contexts. And I'm going to introduce talking about the hub really quickly here, just moving on from Maui's explanation of the application of the labels. Also, I'm currently calling from Wappinger Homelands, or what's also known as Connecticut in the United States. And just kind of running into about the hub, it's an innovative and unique Indigenous data sovereignty technology platform that we created that creates a relational connection between Indigenous and local communities, researchers, and institutions around the world with the local context labels and notices. Since its launch in October 2021, we've seen a huge amount of growth as shown by the numbers here. And we're excited to continue to see the increasing number of accounts, customized labels, applied notices, and projects as people are moving from discussing the interests into being able to apply. And I'll pass it over to Corrie.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So we want to talk through the different account types today, as well as the different hub programs. And so to do that, we wanted to start with this kind of question of, will you be using the labels or the notices? We're going to reiterate this throughout today. We're really open to questions and feedback, and we also know that these categories are never going to perfectly fit every context, and we're really here to support you wherever you're coming from. So the labels that we have are the traditional knowledge and biocultural labels. And as mentioned, these add Indigenous provenance, protocol, and permission information. And they are applied by a community, which it can be a nation, a First Nation, iwi, tribe, confederation, land council, or other sovereign collective group with ancestral ties to lands and natural resources where they live or from where they may have been displaced. So our notices, we have an engagement notice, disclosure notices, and collections care notices. These are used to identify Indigenous collections and data and to recognize Indigenous rights and interests. And they are applied by an institution, which could be a cultural or research institution, a data repository, or other organizations that are typically not governed by an Indigenous or local community. And they can also be applied by a researcher, which is an individual who is conducting research independently or in an institution. I'll pass it over to you again, Ashley, to talk about our account types.
Yeah, so a single user on the hub may be a part of multiple accounts, multiple account types. As we know, many community members and researchers may wear multiple hats. So we're going to take a look at each account type to help answer this question of which account type might be best for you.
Yeah, so I'm going to run through these here. So a community account is for a community, as I just shared. Anybody who's going to be using the labels will be coming through a community account. Some of the examples that we have here are an EB Cultural Department, a Nations Library, a Tribal Cultural Center, a TIPO, Tribal Historic Preservation Office, a Land Council, or Indigenous Rangers. The key kind of differences for a community account is it represents a community, it's authorized and governed by a community, it will have multiple individuals, the community account will have access to customize and apply labels, and they will not have access to notices. Now, an institution account, meanwhile, is for those institutions that I discussed. And some examples of those might be a university archive, a historical society, a college department, a lab research group, a media production company, or a multi-tribal organization. And the key differences for an institution account is that it represents an entity that usually has multiple individuals. It's typically not governed by a community. It will have access to the collection scare notices, and the institution account does not have access to apply labels directly. Now, a researcher account is for an individual. So this could be a library scholar, a biodiversity researcher, a plant breeder, independent consultant, PhD candidate. And the key differences for the researcher account is it represents an individual, somebody who's authoring publications, who's creating data or other outputs. And a researcher account does not have access to the collections care notices or to labels. And Ashley, finish us out with our last account type.
Yeah, so the last account, the integration partner account type, is for an organization that integrates a connection to the local context hub into their platforms to enable other account types to then access their labels and notices. So this could be anything ranging from a content management system, collections management system, digital asset management system, repository or an aggregator, databases, and so on. This account only has access to the Open to Collaborate notice, and it's really specific for building the integration of the local context hub API into different systems used by other clients or customers or other contributors. And there's no need to apply labels or notices directly from this account. So they don't have access to either one of those.
Great. So thank you so much, Corrie and Ashley, for walking through. And I would just say that kind of key piece in relationship to not having access is just in the first instance, that access is actually determined by the relationships to communities. So it's building the relationships. Local context is really a relational tool. It's about creating the capacity to form and build relationships with Indigenous communities, but on Indigenous terms. And that's been really important. One of the reasons why we developed the notices and the labels, the notices as a particular tool for institutions and researchers was because institutions were starting to pull the labels in without having a community relationship, without having a community connection. And that was kind of in antithesis to what communities had asked that needs to be in place in order to kind of create the kind of capacity around how Indigenous data sovereignty and governance needs to work. So we were really thrilled in February to be able to launch a major update on the hub in relationship to agreement programs, expanded account types, different kinds of the API version 2, in addition to improved general functionality and bug fixes. And I just want to say that we have built a system that never existed before. And, you know, as we have then spent 6 months building this kind of new functionality and thinking about incredibly the sustainability of our organization and the responsibilities that we have to communities that are already using our system, but will into the future continue to need this system. This update was a major part of our foundational building blocks to the sustainability of our work and the technological capacity to actually deliver it. So the member and subscriber and integration partner programs were really developed to support our governance, our mission, our sustainability, as well as different kinds of work that we need to be able to do as an organization to really support what communities need in relationship to Indigenous data sovereignty. In particular, I just want to say that we developed this after sustained consultation with user communities for the development of these programs. This was not something that we just thought up overnight. We actually spent a year consulting to develop these kind of changes and then spent 6 months implementing them. I'm going to hand it over to you, James.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Corrie, Ashley, Emily. So the TK and the BC labels will always be free for Indigenous communities. With the new changes to the hubs, we have launched a new Indigenous governance program, and this is the membership program. For this, this is for community account holders who apply labels and wish to contribute to the governance of local context through an optional fee-free opportunity for all Indigenous and local communities who are utilizing local context labels through a community account on the local context hub. Each community account on the hub has the option to nominate a representative to become a member. By becoming a member, community representatives can participate in the governance of local context through quarterly meetings and the council nomination process. The Local Context Council is responsible for strategic frameworks that ensure the organization's activities reflect its values and drive its mission success, and the membership program is a core component of our organization's governance. Jane?
Yeah, great. Thank you, James, so much. So the subscription program is really for users who share a commitment to supporting Indigenous data sovereignty. And this specifically includes institution and researcher account holders who apply notices and support Indigenous interests through community partners and through the application of labels. The launch of our subscription program ensures the sustainability of these mechanisms to ensure Indigenous data sovereignty is realized within the kind of larger landscape of data use and reuse and governance. So based on your use of the hub, not your organization's size or budget, these are the different kinds of subscription types that we have. There's an option to purchase user, API, project, notification bundles as needed. And to help kind of determine which subscription type is best, it's really good if you kind of sit and think about what your needs are within an account. Particularly as a user, how many administrators or editors do you need to have within your account? If you're from an institutional standpoint, how many people are going to be wanting to apply notices? Within the kind of with the API key, you might need to think about the number of API keys your account can create. And this might be, if you're within a university context, you might need multiple API keys depending upon the departments that are part of the subscription. They could be a library, there could be an anthropology department, there could be an art history department, there could be a biology department. All of them may need their own API keys. It also is a little dependent upon how many projects you are planning to create. And this kind of really, Emily will talk about this more in a moment, but this also kind of affects what kind of subscription that you're going to require. And this also affects the kind of different kinds of notifications. So I guess one of the things that I would advise is if you're not really sure, reach out to the local context team. We are always happy to kind of talk through what your needs are before you become a subscriber so that we really can tailor and make sure that this fits your needs and your institutional needs from the very beginning.
Great. Thank you, Jane. So in talking about subscriptions, one common question that we do tend to hear from institutions who are trying to think through which subscription type is best for them is what can be a project or what is a project within the local context hub. So we thought we'd take a moment to walk through that right now. Local context projects were really designed to describe where labels or notices will be applied and are meant to be flexible for a variety of needs and use cases. So, for example, in a community context, a project could be an entire cultural center collection, which could include objects, documents, biological specimens, and belongings. And in an institution context, a project could be an entire museum collection or archive. In talking about more specifics with our next slide, a project could also refer to a particular collection or to a subset of materials. So in a community context, a project might refer to language materials, which could include audio recordings, transcriptions, and publications. And in an institution context, a project could be for museum archival materials, for example. Another example of what projects can be, a project can also represent a single item of cultural heritage or data set, which you can see in this slide here. In a community context, this could be a single publication of oral histories, or in an institution context, for example, this could be a single publication that might include traditional knowledge, but is maybe lacking provenance. And in our final example for what a project can be, projects really can and have been used for cultural heritage as well as biocultural work. So here's an example that's more in the biocultural realm. Pictured here is an example project that includes a biological specimen, its eDNA code, as well as a publication that emerged from the eDNA research. So we do encourage you to explore the public projects page on the Local Context Hub, and through this you can really see just how wide-reaching projects have and can be.
So just moving into the Integration Partner Program, the Integration Partner account type and program are both new, and the account type requires the signing of an Integration Partner Agreement, the completion of a certification process, and continual updates of the integration to meet API requirements. This program is really meant for organizations to certify that their platform's use of the local context labels and notices meets integration standards and expectations. Until the integration partner agreement is signed and the certification process is complete, which includes the integration meeting API requirements and whatnot, then the account type will have limited functionality. For the integration partner program, the fee is $1,500 per year. And just to kind of talk a little bit about the program itself, how we kind of started with this, we did have an early adopters program that we had a few participants help us flesh out the parts of this program regarding the account type on the hub itself, as well as what the certification process could look like and would look like. We had participants from iPlaces, ARCA Digital Repository, the Data Services for Indigenous Scholarship and Sovereignty, University of Washington, Omeka, and the Dataverse Project. And we are currently working with a few of those early adopters to get them situated as integration partners as well, now that the program and account type have been launched in the hub. We do have ongoing and previous work around integrations with DataCite, Genome, Erga, ORCID, and Otis. And I'm going to pass it over to Jane to talk a little bit more about some of those integrations.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I think, one of the things to know is that we're building an ecosystem that supports Indigenous data sovereignty that was never built before. And as we do that, we have to create different kinds of integration scaffolding for the different ways in which data is aggregated across systems, databases, data systems. And I think what we're really excited about is some of this kind of hidden work that you don't necessarily see, but we're in the process of starting to publish some of that. Particularly, we'll be able to publish the work that we've done with Otis around JSON LD and kind of how the local context labels and notices map into JSON LD and what that looks like. That's taken about 6 months of hard work that Ashley has been really kind of critically involved in from the very beginning. So just kudos to you, Ashley, for that work that you've been doing to create these kind of publications. In the open data spaces, we're working to create guidelines that support Creative Commons licenses and local context labels and notices. So that's kind of another space to watch as well. Just kind of thinking about all these things require new work because it hasn't been done before. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Amy June.
Thank you, Jane. Hey again, everyone. My name's Amy June. I'm a citizen of the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, and I serve as the outreach coordinator at Local Context. You may have listened in on this and wondered a little bit about what your next steps might be. So we'll just run through sort of the what now, depending on your use case. If you've had an account for a while and you're wondering what step to take next, this is going to depend on where your subscription and confirmation steps are at. So if your researcher or institution account has already signed a subscription agreement, you will not need to take any further action to maintain your functionality and use of the hub and notices. If you're part of a confirmed community account, you will also not need to take any further action to maintain the functionality and use of the hub and labels. Our team will be reaching out to community account administrators in the near future to share more information about the recently launched membership program that James shared a bit about. If your account is in earlier stages, our team will have reached out to you about confirming your community account or completing a subscription agreement for institutions and researchers. For institutions, there is an invoicing process, and for researchers, the program is free but does require a signed agreement. So if you feel you may have missed this communication, please do check your spam or junk folder, as our emails are sometimes filtered there. Otherwise, email us directly at support@localcontext.org, and we will be sure to follow up with next steps. Until those confirmations or agreements are finalized, your account will have limited access and functionality.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. So we're going to head into the question portion. There were a few submitted questions, so I haven't seen any questions pop into the chat. So I'm thinking we can start with one of the submitted questions. I will put it in the chat and also read it out loud. And the question is, does creating an integration partner account require any sort of verification from the organization? Does creating an integration partner account require any sort of paperwork, similar to the one that was sent around for researcher accounts in January?
Thanks. I'm happy to start this off. So yes, as I mentioned before, there is a certification process for integration partners, which the development team will support. This is really to ensure the accurate and appropriate usage of the labels and notices, displaying the icons, displaying the text, linking back to the hub, even metadata work as well, if that's applicable to your platform, any place that the labels and notices are being displayed, that they're being displayed properly. And that includes implementation of the API calls and other technical infrastructure, which we will work with you on connecting as well if you have questions. This would create a seamless experience for your users to be able to utilize the labels and notices within your system without needing to, let's say, themselves individually connect to the API. It would just be built into the platform kind of at the top level. And so with the certification process, it starts with either contacting local contacts or creating an integration partner account on the hub. Even though the account will start out as limited functionality, we will work with you to get the integration partner agreement completed and work through the certification process so that then that can be available. And once we have certified integration partners from the hub, you will be able to see those on the registry. So if there's a platform that you're interested, even if it's some of the early adopters that we mentioned earlier, definitely take a look on the registry because they will appear there once their account has been certified. And then you'll know that that platform, if you're using it, is connected to the Local Context Hub API and how you can go about taking advantage of that connection.
Unless anybody has anything to add, I did see a question pop up that I can read here in abbreviated form. We're intending to implement a data repository Dataverse to preserve and make accessible data sets that we generate via consortium projects. I'm interested in engagement notices within the Dataverse records. I think this would be an institution account potentially.
Yeah, totally. That's super exciting, Jean, because we've been working with Dataverse for the last year to build out a metadata block for local contexts. So that is functional and is available. And I think an institutional account is perfect for your needs. It's like right exactly in the sweet spot of where we're at.
Did have another submitted question. What recommendations can local contexts offer to cultural institutions to effectively begin consultations and more actively build relationships with Indigenous communities through the hub rather than passively wait for Indigenous communities to connect?
So, I mean, we've seen really important, meaningful, and kind of long-term relationships build over time as really an effective way to sustain relationships with Indigenous communities. This is long-term work. This is never going to be a fast fix for a problem that has been created over a really long period of time, but it is the will and the commitment and the kind of the pieces that you need to put together to really build the relationships. So I think that, you know, being proactive with outreach, a lot of communities are excited when they get a connection. They go, oh my gosh, you're using local context. All right, let's go. We kind of know that this means that you're serious in relationship to thinking about our interests, our rights as well. So this is kind of like one of the pieces why we really recommend that institutions start with the open to collaborate notice, right? It is just sitting there to say, we've kind of done some of our work to be ready to actually engage with communities, because it just doesn't happen automatically. The time of trust that is required, but local context is that kind of like a connected tool that helps do that. And so I'm really excited to kind of see how the different kinds of intentional consideration around the different kinds of requests that come in and engaging with the outcomes, because there's often what it opens is something that nobody else thought about previously. And I think that is what is a kind of a gift in a way, is the generative relationships about things that no one considered yet. To kind of what it does mean to bring Indigenous voices back into these spaces and to bring Indigenous authority changes the nature of some of the collections entirely. I think we know that many collections are unusable because we don't really know what's in them, and we don't have the proper consents and permissions that sit around that. But that kind of active engagement and reach out to communities really speaks to a different kind of possibility of relationship building and also future projects.
One more submitted question that we got was, one common criticism from post-colonial perspectives is, why do you call them traditional knowledge labels? It might be helpful to explain the etymology of this term.
We get this question a lot about why they call traditional knowledge labels. And I think it's really helpful to explain the etymology in relationship to that. We really developed traditional knowledge labels to be internationally recognizable and widely applicable and inclusive. And we understand that the term traditional knowledge is often used interchangeably with Indigenous knowledge, but we keep the term traditional knowledge because it is part of international law and parlance, particularly coming out of the World Intellectual Property Organization, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and other international frameworks. And so while we recognize that interchangeability, we use it because it is also registered within international contexts, and particularly within communities that are in states that don't recognize necessarily Indigenous peoples as a particular self-defining group. We find that it is actually something that allows for more Indigenous communities to use local context labels than not. So that is kind of part of our rationale when we created the traditional knowledge labels, and understanding, of course, that we are really working within digital context, that traditional knowledge travels across time and is part of ever-present future relationships. So the use of the term then is strategic, and very purposeful, aligning with international law in this area and being flexible and as inclusive as an international mechanism as possible.
There's one more question that just popped into the chat. Is it possible to see a full list of current integration partners? I was looking to see if gbif.org or other biodiversity data aggregators might be in there already.
Yes, we're working with GBIF for integration at the moment. We can't really talk about all the pieces of that, but we're really excited that within the conference on living data in Colombia in October this year, we'll be able to provide some real advice that includes our partnership with GBIF in relationship to integration.
There was a question that will segue nicely into some resources and information that we wanted to close with. The question was about if there are regional networks supporting local context use in Latin America. We do have several regional networks. These have largely been started based on our existing relationships, on interest, and on volunteers to help us organize and make new connections. So we currently have regional networks for Aotearoa New Zealand, Hawaii, Europe and the UK, Canada, and Northeast and Southwest of the so-called United States. Over the next year, we're aiming to establish a group focused on Spanish-speaking communities, which is an area that we're interested and keen to grow. We also have peer working groups. These are groups that are communities of practice, and we have 4 of those currently: Indigenous Communities Working Group, a Cultural Institution Working Group, a Technical Implementation Working Group, and a Library Working Group. Following this webinar, we have set a few meetings over the next 2 weeks for a couple of those working groups, and this will focus on discussions and questions related to the Hub programs. If you are currently a member of those groups, you will have received information about how to join. And if you're interested in joining us, please see more information on our website page about the working groups and the networks. Next, if you would like to read more about the Hub agreement programs, think about which one is right for you. You can check out the Hub agreements page on our website, which we recently updated. We also updated our frequently asked questions FAQ with a new section on the programs, and this can be a helpful resource for answering any lingering questions that you have. If you're still not sure which program or subscription type fits your context specs, we welcome you to reach out to us through our program inquiry form, through our support form, or through email, and we can talk through options together. Next, Emily is going to close us out with some opportunities to stay updated and get involved, and we'll include links to all of these things in the chat or the video description.
Yeah, of course. So for upcoming webinars and conferences about local contexts and to attend our regularly offered information sessions and Hub demo sessions, you can access the events page on our website. In addition, we have a seasonal newsletter and accounts on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, as well as a Vimeo and YouTube channel, which is actually where this recording will be posted. So with that, I'll pass it back to Corrie, and thank you all for your thoughtful questions.
Tumike o tātou kaupapa I te rā, he karakia mō tātou. Kua mutu a mātou mahi, mō tēnei wā, kua tau te rangi Māorie kia mau te aroha. Kia u o tātou mahi, hei oranga wairua e manakitia mai mātou katoa o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi ki a rangi nui ki runga ki a papatūnu ki raro ki a aorangi I te mea katoa, tihei mauri ora.